move into real history, but it's still very legendary because you're working with very ancient history and the legends of the ancient Indians and the ancient Hindus and many of the ancient religions, because that was how those people lived. And so while it's not history as history, it's moving into real history. So that by the end of the year, you're working with Egypt, and we do have written history about Egypt. So you can see how we moved from the fairy tale to fables and gradually moved to the point where we're really talking about real history. And from that, we move on to the Greeks, somewhere the end of 5th grade, beginning of 6th, and Rome. And again, the life in Rome is very meaningful to a 6th grader. They're at the point where they're becoming much more conscious of fairness and law and rule. And that was what Rome was all about. And we move from there into the life of Christ, the Crusades, the life of Muhammad, the Islamic people, and medieval life, the cloister, the castle, the city, and how those things came about. And then in 7th and 8th grade, we move on to much more turbulent times: exploration, Reformation, and Renaissance. Right at the time when their hormones are raging, they're studying a period of time that was very tumultuous and a very rough time to be alive. So by doing that, we diffuse a lot of the problems that might occur with children at what we call in the U.S. 7th and 8th grade is called junior high. I think it's called high school, isn't it? That age child is going through a tumultuous period in their life, and if we can meet their needs with history that involves those things, it's very helpful to them. Also in a Waldorf school, they would spend a great deal of time making and putting on a play, a major play, oftentimes a Shakespeare play. And it would take up a good portion of the year. They would make all the sets, all the costumes, write the music, the whole thing. And I've seen some of these productions. They're just amazing. And Dee Dee produces some of them, I know.
Yeah, we've just done Midsummer Night's Dream, and the youngest child was 9 and the oldest was 19.
Yeah. So it's in doing these kinds of things, at this particular age level, we're meeting needs that would otherwise not be met. The two to ask questions. Are there some questions? Yes.
Question. I'm interested in what you're talking about with the artistic rendition. What happens for the child who has difficulty in creating the rendition? You mentioned sculpting with glass or painting. What happens for the child who's not terribly, quote, good at doing this?
He's probably the child who's really good at everything else. And it gives him a chance to be challenged a little bit. The real heady child is the one who's going to have trouble with this. He probably learned to read when he was 5 and a half and has that down pat. He probably learned his math, and drawing is going to be his hard thing. And it's okay. I'll tell you a little story. The first time I visited a Waldorf classroom, I went to the Ann Arbor school when it was in a very old school building. And I had an appointment to visit a 2nd grade, and I got there before the teacher, but there were 2 children there. And the 2 children took me in hand and took me into the room and showed me around the room. And they would say, now this is so-and-so's knitting. She's the best knitter in our class. And this is so-and-so's math book. He's the best math person in our class. And this is a drawing by so-and-so. She's the best artist in our class. And never anything about me. He wasn't tooting his own horn at all. He was telling who was the best at everything. And so he told me about 10 or 12 children and what they did really well. So by presenting all this in not only a heady fashion, but in a kinesthetic fashion and an artistic fashion, every child gets a chance to shine, and every child gets a chance to fail or be challenged. It's easier to say be challenged than fail. But, you know, the child who is too successful, it can be a problem, because sooner or later he's going to run up against it, and then he's not going to be able to deal with it. So it's good to have these challenges ongoing as time passes.
Also, Barbara, if I may say, if children start really young doing painting before they realize they're not a good painter, and they watch the teacher, they become good painters.
Right.
There's no question, it's innate in everybody. And it just gets brought out as part of the group process.
And when we talk about painting tomorrow, I'll tell how we start. It's purely the use of color, the wet on wet. You can't make really clear objects when you're working on wet paper with wet paint. It's very diffused, and you're playing with color. You're not trying to create anything. You're just playing with the color, and it sort of creates itself. And that's what you want. And when they've done that since they're 3 or 4 years old, they gradually improve. And many of them are better than I am right to start with. Yes.
And even with the wax modelling, I mean, I've just started doing all this and learning myself, and it took me a little while to learn how to, you know, and it's so modelling the wax with figures and things like that. It's wonderful to be able to do it with them and learning at the same time. So you stumble along and the head falls off or whatever happens, so you just get on with it. But that's the fun of it.
Yeah. And for them, it's a process. It's not the product so much. And beeswax is quite expensive, so you crumple them up after a week or two and do something else. So, and it doesn't bother most children, because they'd rather create something new than keep looking at the same old thing that they made 2 weeks ago. So it works. One more question? Yes, Elizabeth?
How do you deal with the special children, the kids who've got the ADD, or the kids who are slightly autistic, the kids who don't fit in to the average model, the kid who will just not be there, you know, physically but mentally just isn't there, is off at the fairies, whatever. You know that they're perfectly capable of doing it. What do you do with these children?
Well, for most children, even if they're ADD, not much is expected of them in a Waldorf classroom. They're not sitting still very much. They're moving around. In a Waldorf classroom, the desks may move around the room 5 or 6 times in a day. You move them all to the edge so you can do some active math games, and then you move them all back. And it works like clockwork. These children know where their desk goes, and it's amazing. It takes about a minute and a half to move the desk from the side back to where they belong, and every desk is where it belongs and where it was to start with. You try that in a public school classroom and it'll take you a half hour. But they're used to doing it. They know where their desk goes, and they expend a fair amount of energy doing all this stuff. So your ADD child is probably getting enough exercise just in the daily activities in the classroom.
Just a quick one. Computers, are they yes or no?
Not at this age, no. A computer probably wouldn't appear in a Waldorf classroom until 7th or 8th grade, maybe not till high school. And there's differing opinions on that, but the computer is a tool, and it's not a tool for small children. You don't give your 2-year-old a saber saw, you know, and the computer is a similar thing. Okay, I'm going to go on to the last age group, or at least the last age group in childhood, Now, I'm still working on 7-year cycles, so we all are. Now, this last period of time, 7 to 14, no, I mean, sorry. 14 to 21. And in this period, you usually see huge growth in the limbs. You see your children getting longer and longer legged, and they grow into their feet. So at this point, they have fully come into their astral. And it's those hormones and those emotions that are raging. By the end of it, hopefully, they come into their ego. Many of us in our culture don't by 21, and maybe don't by the end of our lives. But that's the hope, that we will grow into our ego. And they learn through thinking. And it's this period in which judgment begins to develop. We don't really expect a huge amount of judgment from our children before that. And the I that they speak around 16 is I as thinker. Again, it's divided into 3 sections. The first one will be the head or the will. And you know that your 14-year-old is pretty willful, just like your 2-year-old. And the second section would be rhythmic again, or feeling. And somewhere in here where they really fall in love for the first time. And the last one is they learn from an adult expert. And they seek, their gesture is one of seeking truth. So in a Waldorf high school, the teachers are usually experts in their field. In many high schools in the U.S., anyway, Waldorf high schools, many of the teachers are PhDs in their field, in science or history or English or whatever. So they're really learning from experts. And the adult needs to provide truth. And if you don't, they'll catch you. Throughout this whole period, usually starting about 10 or 12, they'll watch your speedometer walk. Mom, you're not going you're going faster than the speed limit. Mom, you're not going as fast as the speed limit. If you go to visit a junior high or early high school, you'll find an awful lot of the children, if they don't have uniforms, wearing black and white. Because they see life as black and white. And it's around that stage that the artwork they do in a Waldorf school will be black and white. It'll be pointillism or line drawings, perspective, pen and ink sketching, that kind of thing. Because that's where they are. Life is viewed in black and white for them. And that's part of the whole development of judgment. At first your judgment is very black and white. And then as time goes on, you mellow and you begin to see subtleties in right and wrong. And if the child has had a really effective feeling life throughout the 7 to 14 and a really effective childhood, then this feeling life can move in and help make this judgment into less of a black and white, really judgmental way of looking at the world. We want people to be able, we want our children to be able to see the subtleties in morality and the subtleties in doing the right thing, the subtleties in manners. And if we've given them the beauty and the feeling life and the goodness in early childhood, they'll be able to make those distinctions as part of their judgment. Now the child has, throughout this whole time, has learned a great deal in the elementary school. And a lot of information in a very organic, artistic way from his enthusiastic amateur teacher. And he's become an individual who no longer needs an authority figure. He still needs some authority, but hopefully he's developed a certain amount of self-discipline. And hopefully his motivation to learn has not been stifled. And so he can pursue knowledge and realize that it's not a list of facts in his head, but it's truly a part of him. And he begins to organize what he already knows into a body of knowledge that he can recall and use to live. And he now can learn out of his own developing freedom. And he brings an enthusiasm and a curiosity that will last him the rest of his lifetime. So when the child leaves the Waldorf High School, he or she has expanded the abilities that they learned in the kindergarten through imaginative thinking and feeling and willing. And the child truly has lived through these 3 stages of development. Receiving, being received with reverence, educated in love, and now we can send them forth in freedom. We have about 10 minutes until lunchtime, so if you have some questions about any of this or just the most recent section, go ahead and get them.
I have one. How does assessment happen in the world? And how do they line up with at university and
In the, up through 8th grade, at least in the U.S., Waldorf schools generally don't do testing. That's changing a bit because parents are beginning to have the same worries you are and imposing it on the school. Oh, well, good. But the children up until 8th grade in a Waldorf school in the U.S., the assessment